World War I was a war between the Entente powers and the Central Powers, which included the German Empire. Their defeat in World War I left Germany in a difficult position. They were in heavy economic debt after being required to pay war reparations to the Entente powers, had lost much of their land, and had very little national pride. After the Nazi regime came to power in 1933, the amount of anti-Semitism increased drastically. Anti-Jewish legislation began to pass, boycotts against Jewish-owned businesses started, and Jews were being deported.
After a Polish Jew shot a German embassy official on November 7, 1938, Nazi officials planned riots throughout Germany. These became known as the Kristallnacht riots, or more simply, Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht was a one-night pogrom against Jews in Nazi Germany from November 9 to 10, 1938. These resulted in the arrests of more than 30,000 Jewish men and at least 91 deaths. This was a turning point in the way Jews were being persecuted in Nazi Germany, the way Nazism was perceived internationally, the amount of anti-Semitism in Germany, and helped spur Hitler's radical agendas that would lead to World War II.
The Treaty of Versailles was a treaty signed at the end of World War I that forced Germany to take almost all the responsibility for the war, as well as requiring Germany to pay 132 billion marks in damage reparations. Since the war ruined Germany's economy, they were obliged to pay in natural resources instead, including oil and land. In 1923, France invaded Germany's industrial heartland because Germany had missed a reparations payment. This led to a workers' strike as well as hyperinflation that left the German economy in a mess. The Nazis were a far-right political party that pledged to reverse the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles, put the German people back to work, and restore Germany to its rightful position as a world power. The leader of the Nazi Party was Adolf Hitler, who became Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Hitler and other Nazi leaders successfully directed the anger and hatred of the German people towards the Jews. Many people held the left-wing parties responsible for the economic mess, and since the Jews were synonymous with the left, they became the scapegoats. In 1933, Hitler ordered a one-day boycott against Jewish-owned businesses. In 1935, the Nazi government implemented the Nuremberg Laws, which stripped German Jews of their citizenship, their rights, ability to participate in certain social events, and their dignity. By 1936, Jews were prohibited from participating in parliamentary elections, and signs reading "Jews Not Welcome" started appearing throughout Germany.
As time went on, Jews were being treated worse by the Nazi government, and hostility towards the Jewish community of Germany increased. By this time, many Jews were being deported to the Germany-Poland border, where conditions were extremely harsh. Food was difficult to come across, and water was even rarer. There's little to no shelter, and the weather was very unforgiving. The mass deportation enraged the whole Jewish community, most of whom either had family deported to the border or were deported themselves. Two victims of the mass deportation happened to be the parents of Herschel Grinspan, a 17-year-old Jewish boy living in Paris at the time. This enraged him so much that he bought a revolver and would walk into the German embassy and ask to meet with the highest-ranking member of the embassy present, claiming he was a spy with important documents. That member happened to be Ernst von Rath, as the senior ambassador was out of the embassy at the time. After von Rath asked for the documents, Herschel Grinspan shot him 5 times in the abdomen, leading to critical injuries. After the shots were fired, Grinspan made no attempt to escape and confessed to shooting von Rath. Sporadic anti-Jewish riots started breaking out on November 8th, and von Rath died on the 9th due to the wounds. Joseph Goebbels was a Reich Minister of Propaganda, and that night, at a meeting of the Nazi leaders, used it as an opportunity to persecute Jews. The Nazi leaders ordered the newspapers to put the story on the front page, and later that night, at 11:45 p.m., a report of the burning of a Jewish house was made.
Telegrams were then sent to Nazi headquarters and offices across the country, and various police, paramilitary, and Hitler youth groups were mobilized in the middle of the night to take vengeance on the Jewish population. They were instructed to dress in civilian clothes to support the fiction that the entirety of the German public was enraged and hated the Jews. Jewish synagogues, prayer houses, and cemeteries in particular were targeted by rioters, who attacked or burned over 1,400 places of worship. The emergency services were sluggish in responding to the fires and would only reactivate threatened adjacent Aryan property. A fireman who had responded to a fire during Kristallnacht wrote about it in a letter. Eventually, we were allowed to take the fire engine out, but only very slowly. We were ordered not to use any water till the whole synagogue was burned down. Many of us did not like to do that, but we had to be careful not to voice our opinions because the enemy is listening. Only after one of the party members was worried that his house was going to catch fire were we allowed to use water. But even then, we just had to stand and watch until the house of prayers was reduced to rubble and ashes. Of the roughly 9,000 Jewish businesses still operating in 1938, approximately 7,500 were raided, looted, or destroyed. The smashed glass windows are what gave Kristallnacht its name. However, the riots did not just result in damaged Jewish businesses. Jewish homes were also broken into and looted.
And in our apartment, every chair and every sofa and every bed was cut open with a knife.
Any Jewish people unfortunate enough to be nearby were beaten, abused, and even murdered. The exact number of deaths that the event caused remain unclear, although a figure of 91 was circulated for years. Later studies show roughly 1,400 Jews died as a direct result of the pogrom, whether it be murder or suicide.
Within hours of Kristallnacht, Jewish men between the ages of 16 through 60 throughout Germany were taken and sent to concentration camps. This went on for days until more than 30,000 Jewish men were imprisoned. On Armistice Day, a total of 6 Jews were killed in Berlin and 1 in Innsbruck as well. All Jewish schools, newspapers, and cultural organizations have been closed until further notice, as well as laws saying that Jews would be unable to live or do business in most districts of Germany and Austria. Those who owned shops and apartments would have them taken away and be exchanged for places in segregated areas. Additionally, in Holland and Switzerland, there was a very strong criticism of Kristallnacht. Meanwhile, in the US, after reading about the event in the newspapers, anti-Nazi demonstrators gathered in front of the German embassy to protest the violence and join the British and French leaders in protesting against Kristallnacht.
Worldwide protest against the Nazi pogrom. Anti-Hitler demonstrations have taken place all over the country.
Back in Germany, Hermann Göring, whose rank was only below Hitler's himself, stated, "The German Jews as a whole, as a punishment for the abominable crimes, will have to pay a contribution of 1 billion marks," as well as encouraging Aryanization, which involved eliminating Jews from the economy and essentially making them debtors on a pension. After Kristallnacht, Nazis started their territorial expansion, and aggression against Germany's neighbors initially succeeded without resistance. Hitler and other Nazi leaders counted on the reluctance of Britain and stronger countries to intervene for fear of another war. However, Germany's occupation of Prague left no doubt in Germany's intentions. On September 1st, 1939, a massive German military force invaded and conquered Poland within a month, thus marking the official start of World War II. In April 1940, Germany occupied Denmark, and in May of the same year, they invaded France, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Belgium.
In June, France surrendered to Germany, which caused Hitler's popularity and the people's trust in him to skyrocket, because many considered the invasion as revenge for World War I. After the signing of the Tripartite Pact with more than 3 million soldiers, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, while sending their prisoners to concentration camps throughout Europe.
Under conditions of war and military occupation, the Nazis could pursue their racial goals much more radically. As German troops advanced into Eastern Europe, where millions more Jews lived, German authorities exploited existing anti-Jew attitudes among local inhabitants. As the war went on, ghettos were established where Jews were isolated from non-Jews and forced to live under extremely harsh conditions where overcrowding, disease, and lack of sanitation was normal. To help carry out the final solution, also known as the Holocaust, the Nazis established extermination camps, transit camps, forced labor camps, and more, which would go down in infamy. Eventually, the Soviet forces would make their way into Poland, liberating the camps. In April 1945, US troops liberated the concentration camps, with the reporter stating, "To future generations it must be told, once man did this to his brothers, in the 20th century there existed a civilization for which 12 years returned to barbarianism."
As the world watched in horror, Kristallnacht shattered illusions and revealed the true face of Nazism. The events of that night echoed through history, forever changing the world's perception of that set of ideologies. The event spurred Hitler's agendas to all-time extremes, leading to the Second World War. Additionally, the persecution of Jews escalated, leading to extreme anti-Semitism, decrees against Jews, and a few years later, the tragedy known as the Holocaust.